Just when you thought college wrestling couldn't innovate anymore, the UFC enters to help out college wrestling. They made a major partnership with a Division I program that I'm going to be talking about the implications and what it actually means. Plus, we'll be talking about the major upset over North Carolina and the big upcoming event that actually starts today. We'll be talking all about this in this week's Wrestling Headline, sponsored by Defense Soap. So let's stop stalling and start talking about the first wrestling headline, which is that the UFC has partnered with the University of Iowa for a partnership. This is just big as a sponsor, and I'll tell you why. A couple of reasons. So this has something that kind of came out of nowhere that I wasn't necessarily expecting, and this is something that's going to mostly just include like extra signage around the Carver Hawkeye Arena, but I think it could have even more implications. Tom Brand said about the partnership that between Iowa Wrestling and UFC, it's a perfect fit, and I would tend to agree. We both celebrate tough physical athletes who compete at the highest level. And Tom Brands is absolutely right. And there's an article from Bashmania that I want to point out because he talked about some of the big things that could happen with this. But first, I want to say that this is coming off of the heels of the battle at Bragg, when Campbell, North Carolina, and Michigan competed in Fort Bragg in North Carolina, filmed and broadcasted on the UFC Fight Pass. This was the first major wrestling event the UFC Fight Pass had put on, and they seem to have garnered some interest, that's the UFC, in college wrestling, and it only makes sense that they're going to these big college programs that have big marketability, like Campbell, like North Carolina, like Michigan, and now with Iowa. So let me point out this article that Bashmania, Justin Bash, put out on his Rockfin page, and if you want to check that out, I highly recommend it. But he's talking about why these partnerships are so big. He said on the competition side, wrestlers are having success in MMA. We're seeing that, of course, with Bo Nickel and Anthony Gassar, Nick Piccinini, Bryce Meredith. The list goes on and on and on. And getting wrestlers from Iowa to go into UFC would be even big. I mean, comment below if you want to see Austin DeSanto enter the MMA. I have a feeling that the answer is going to be you want to see it. On the sponsorship side, NIL opened up gates for a potential deal like this to happen. Absolutely. And I would imagine that we're going to see more Iowa Hawkeye wrestlers start to wear UFC gear. And potentially there's even a patch on their singlet. I don't know if they're allowed to do that based on their licensing and everything, but I think that would be pretty darn awesome. On the streaming side, they could potentially start streaming Iowa matches. Now, it obviously depends because most of them are streamed on the Big Ten Network and some are on Flow Wrestling. But now, I wonder if some of those out-of-conference matches and dual meets could now be streamed on the UFC Fight Pass. That would be something that's absolutely phenomenal, and I would be behind 100%. And the other thing is just that they are just going to be huge for social media. With social media taking over the world nowadays, it's massively important. And he points out in this article some of the major, just look at Flow Wrestling has the biggest wrestling accounts in all of wrestling, over hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. Well, look at UFC, who has millions. I mean, this is a massive new audience for college wrestling. And I think that's the takeaway for me, is that this is going to be absolutely massive. Although this deal seems awesome on the forefront, with just like some signage around Carver Hawkeye, yeah, it'll be cool to see UFC. But in general, I think this is going to be a huge move for the sport moving forward. And that moves us on to the second wrestling headline, which is the major upset. We talked about North Carolina. Well, App State beat North Carolina Tar Heels 19-16 in a Thursday evening bout. This is not a upset that I was expecting to see, but when you looked at the matchups and what actually came down to it, it actually looked pretty good. The duel started out with Caleb Smith. I mean, he paved the way for the success here with a pin over Jack Wagner. Not an upset or anything, as you see number 22 over 33, but still a fall in the first period starts things off on the right note, especially when you're wrestling in Chapel Hill. App State was wrestling away here around the Raleigh area. Sean Carter continued the duel off with a win over Joey Melendez with a decision, but Lachlan McNeil came back with a major. Moving it on to John Milner. We'll be talking about this Will Miller's tie-breaking takedown that came down in just a second. But first, I want to talk about John Milner, who, I mean, this guy is leading the way forward for the App State Mountaineers. He was an All-American from the SoCon, the only SoCon All-American last year, and he is paving the way forward. But they're getting some other impressive wrestlers on their team, such as the redshirt freshman Will Miller. Now, at 174 pounds, App State was looking pretty darn good, but then it came down to Miller, who, I mean, he was expected to lose against Clay Lout. I mean, Lout is one of North Carolina's toughest wrestlers, and he ended up getting a tie-breaking takedown in the third period, as you see here from this Twitter clip. And it was 5-5 in the third period. Miller ended up working for a takedown in the third to win the match 7-5. This propelled App State forward to victory. Now, it wasn't just a foregone conclusion because there were still a couple of matches that needed to happen, but still, this was absolutely impressive for him. And as you see here, the final score ended up 19-16, App State over North Carolina. Even though North Carolina won those last three bouts, 184, 197, and 285. This 174-pound bout right here with Will Miller beating a number 8 ranked Clay Lout shows how tough the App State Mountaineers actually are. And I want to bring this away in my takeaways because, yes, App State is a absolutely impressive team. My feelings about them are how I feel about Pitt. I don't really like either team, honestly, but I cannot overlook an impressive victory. And when you are a team as tough as App State, the SoCon's got to be watching out. The other thing that I want to note here is that now I'm looking for an awesome potential. I want to look for a partnership between the HCC and SoCon, make that merger actually happen. But I'm looking for an awesome season from Will Miller going forward because this team is absolutely tough. And part of being tough is being able to defend yourself, not only against opponents, but against skin diseases. That's true, especially this holiday season. Whether you're at the gym, working off those extra Christmas cookies, giving hugs to relatives at the door, or you're a wrestler getting ready for an upcoming tournament on the mat, you need to protect your skin. That's where Defense Soap comes in. They offer natural soaps, FDA-approved acne care treatments, body wipes, hand sanitizers, and more so you can keep your skin healthy this holiday season and beyond. Give your skin a gift this holiday season by going to defensesoap.com. It's the first link down in the description below. Thanks to Defense Soap for sponsoring this video. And so let's move on to some quick lightning headlines. And the first one here is that Nebraska just barely edged out South Dakota State 22-17. And before I get into the box scores, you got to look at this photo here. That has to be the photo of the year with a bloodied up Peyton Robb of Nebraska. I absolutely love that. So let's move on to some box scores, which there weren't a ton of upsets here. And so the big thing that I just want to give away is that just South Dakota State, even though they're a number 18 ranked team, Nebraska's number 16, Nebraska is still a Big Ten school, and so I got to give props to South Dakota State. The other big duel that happened over the weekend, which was impressive, were the Virginia Tech Hokies taking out Stanford. Again, not an upset or anything, but just a dual meet win that I want to call out. They beat them 22-12. The other thing that happened over the weekend that I actually didn't even know was going on was that Stalemates, you may know the other big YouTube channel here about college wrestling, and actually now apparently they're getting into international wrestling. They hosted the Beat the Streets Gala Los Angeles in a dual meet event. I thought this was very cool and a way forward as you see different streaming options out there that now they're streaming on YouTube. I'd like to see more events like this happen. One other thing that happened over the weekend, which I thought was really, really cool getting into the Christmas season, the Christmas spirit, was that Clarion and Gardner Webb actually had these challenge blocks out, which were wrapped up like Christmas presents for their dual meet over the weekend. Very, very cool. And I want to give props to them just for like celebrating the holiday season. I think that was very cool. And that moves us on to our third wrestling headline, which is that the collegiate wrestling duels are happening right now. They are happening live on Rockfin, and if you want to watch that, I have things linked up down in the description below for you to go and watch that, and if you click that link, it actually helps to support this channel. But what is going on here, just like last year, this is a 2-day dual meet event. It's a round robin on day 1 with pool play, with a red pool and a blue pool, and those are split into 2 pools themselves, as you see right here in this graphic. That moves us on to the day 2, which is basically however teams competed on day 1, moves them onto the placing rounds on day 2. And yes, there are 2 champions. I want to point that out. There's a red pool champion and a blue pool champion. Last year, Penn State and Iowa won those pools. This year, who could it be? I have my predictions. I'll give those in the takeaway. But there are 12 teams competing. Northern Iowa, Ohio State, Lock Haven, Lehigh, NC State, Cal Poly, Iowa State, Cornell, Oregon State, North Carolina, Penn State, and Central Michigan. Now, I actually gave my entire preview for this in my newsletter, so if you're not subscribed to that, I recommend checking that out. It's absolutely free to join the newsletter, and I'll have that article linked up down below if you want to check out more. But the event is happening like literally right now as I'm filming this video, like December 19th and 20th. That's Monday and Tuesday. So there are results, already coming in. The red pool, which I'm looking forward to, is going to have some big competition with each of these teams: Ohio State, Lock Haven, Northern Iowa. I think it's ultimately going to come down probably to NC State and Ohio State for the red pool. And I'll give my preview, but I'm looking out for Lehigh, and honestly, even Cal Poly is going to give some tough competition here. As far as what's going on in the other pool, look, Penn State's going to be the ultimate team to beat here. I think Cornell or Iowa State may be able to push each other, but I don't think either team's going to be able to defeat Penn State. And that brings us to some of the top matches that I want to point out from this. I actually posted this on Instagram, and some of the top potential matches that you could see this weekend are Penn State's Roman Bravo Young versus Vito Arujau at 133 pounds. I would be really interested in that happening. Trent Hiley and Caleb Romero could be an interesting match. Caleb Romero potentially, he's upset some major players before, has pushed some big guys to the limits. We look at Paniro Johnson and Yanni Diakmahalis. Paniro has been on the rise this year as a freshman. Could he take out Yanni? I lean towards no, but hey, it's a crazy season so far, isn't it? Isaac Trumbull and Bernie Truow. This 197 pounds weight class is just insane this year. So who knows what could happen? Bernie is the favorite in that matchup. We look at some freshmen here with Lachlan McNeil and Casey Swiderski. I think they'll just give us a good bout at 141 pounds. Ed Scott and Josh Humphrey, same exact thing at 157. These are 2 high-flying dudes who I will be watching out for at this event, should this happen with the NC State and Lehigh matchup. Again, Romero could face against Hawkeyes in a dual meet event. And Max Dean versus Younger Bastida, I think, is one of the really interesting matchups that I'll be looking forward to. Of course, you can watch this all live on Rockfin. As far as my takeaways for this event, I think ultimately it's going to be another Big Ten victory with Ohio State and Penn State taking over and winning the collegiate wrestling duels. Now, if you want to check out, I actually did a video just this past year about the top Penn State wrestlers of all time. You can check out that video linked up right here.